thrilled to have you join me tonight. I understand there's quite a few people watching me remotely. And this is going to be an experiment for all of you and me, because the last time I was on stage and had an audience was 33 years ago when I got married. So, needless to say, I'm a beginner at giving lectures. But I really believe in my topic. I'm passionate about it. It's a life-lived experience, and I don't have legal credentials, medical credentials. I just have life credentials to share. My name is Susanna, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. If you want to know more about pronouns, all you have to do is Google pronouns or gender pronouns, and you can find out all about it. I won't really be going into that tonight, because that is just the tip of the iceberg about my topic. And I'm not going to go into any politically sensitive areas as far as I know. That's not really why I'm here tonight, to talk about bathrooms, locker rooms, trans women in sports, drag shows, people having hormone injections under age 18. There's a lot of topics in the news, but I won't be talking about those. What I am here to do is talk about all the steps you might go through if you're going to go from one binary gender to another binary gender. And that's based on the case of my daughter. It's a case study from 2016 to 2020, and it's her story with me at her side, and we did it together. So it's just one case study, but I think it really illustrates a lot for those who aren't familiar with the topic and are wondering what really goes into changing genders. There's a massive amount of paperwork involved. There's follow-ups and prerequisites and internet searches and phone calls, all of those things involved. Even though now, today, there are more resources than were in just not many years ago, 2016, when I started this with my daughter. She was working third shift at a hospital. She was also going to college for a second college degree, and she has learning disabilities, ADHD, and some other issues. So it made sense for me to get power of attorney and do all the daytime phone calls, organizing, making appointments, and everything for her. So you might wonder why I was so heavily involved, not to mention that she's my daughter. So once upon a time, my daughter sat me down and said, well, my son at the time, 23 years old, "Mom, I'm a girl." I took a deep breath and went, "Oh, what do we need to do about that?" And she said, "Well, it sounds like I need to go see a therapist." So she had been researching the matter online probably for years, for all I know. In fact, she explained to me that she'd been gradually feeling since puberty hit around, she was a late bloomer, maybe 14, that something was wrong. And over the period of 10 years, all the way through her undergraduate studies, all into the beginning of having internships out of college, she figured out what the problem was. It's called gender dysphoria, feeling like you are just born into the wrong body. Your mind is here, you are a different gender than what your body says, what your birth certificate says. So we really got to work very quickly, so quickly, and my daughter really suspected that I would play this role. In fact, she predicted how supportive I would be just because I'm a raving liberal, I just admit it. The next day, I went to her hospital anonymously and went into the library at the hospital, and a medical librarian there very nicely spat out of the printer 3 studies about transgender people, because I do not know anything. I was very surprised when my daughter said that she was transgender, but I wasn't totally shocked. There was something about it that rang true. And it's very hard to look back and see any signs that, in fact, all along living as a boy, living as a very young man, that she was ever going to go this direction. Very few clues. So that wasn't very helpful. I read the studies. It didn't teach me a whole lot. It wasn't a whole lot of practical value, but it gave me somewhere to start. So then the next day I went Barnes & Noble online, and guess what? As recently as 2016, I could not find one book on the subject. Now it's in news, it's in magazine stories, there's reams of books on the shelf. But back then, there was nothing except for some that came from a very conservative point of view, saying that if this happens to you or your loved one, you really ought to see a therapist and go through conversion therapy to bring you back to the gender you were born with, which was not going to fly with my daughter or myself. So I started looking up therapists on her employer plan, and the only one I could find pretty easily, and it was a major insurance company out of the Philadelphia area, was one that said that they worked with gender diverse patients. But when she went, it was clear he never even met a transgender person. I think maybe it was mostly gay people that he had dealt with. So I handed him my studies that I gotten from the hospital, and I just said, well, I guess we're going to learn this as we go along. So she really didn't feel that she needed a therapist, but she knew from reading that the only way you can really launch a gender transition, if you're going to do any of the physical changes or legal changes, you need to see a therapist. And there are good reasons for that. I mean, therapists could be sensitive, very sensitive to the fact that you might want to commit suicide because you're in such distress from gender dysphoria. The suicide rates for people like my daughter in that demographic are very high, very high. And probably much higher in impoverished groups, people of color, people that are just not getting family support. There's a lot of reasons why people might just give up even before they start. Over time, she saw 7 therapists. I don't even want to go into the reasons why she saw so many. Each person or each legal group wanted her to see a certain therapist or psychiatrist for this step of the process, this step of the process. Sometimes we thought we were finished up. She'd seen the person enough times, and then a few months later had to go back, and that person, they already had a full roll of patients. There were a lot of reasons, and we did get things out of it. In fact, one therapist that she saw only a few times was pushing back. She was very knowledgeable about transgender people, and young ones at that, but she was pushing back on a decision that was really already made. My daughter was going to transition, period. In fact, about every 3 months I'd say to my daughter, are you sure? You know, I read this thing in Time magazine, this cover story about people that don't feel comfortable with their gender, but they only sort of go halfway, and you call them non-binary. And she just said, I'm a girl. Every time, I am a girl. And the fact is, she is. So I made an unsuccessful attempt to find a therapist that was WPATH knowledgeable. And what is that? There's a World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which meets all the time, and about every 5 years they update their standards of care for therapists, surgeons, endocrinologists, people that deal, especially physically, professionally, with transgender people. And in fact, the surgeon we end up picking apparently is very active in that organization. But the big insurance company said, these are the therapists that you have to pick from. It's not important that they don't know anything about transgender people. You must pick one of these. So I appealed it once, and then I just said, forget it, we'll pay cash. So, which from time to time we paid cash, sometimes we were able to get covered by insurance, it just depended. So the best advice I got to anyone that has anybody in their life that's at almost any stage of this, if they haven't been to the Philadelphia Transgender Wellness Conference, which is held every year in Philadelphia and free to attend, it is the best way to become knowledgeable, make contacts, network, find people of value, providers of various types that could help you or your loved one or your neighbor or your friend or whoever through transition. I mean, it was invaluable to me and exhilarating, just the warmth and the love of the people there. There were allies like myself, parents, significant others, spouses, and a lot of professional people there, either to learn themselves or to teach in their professional track, because now you can take classes and get credit for certain professional organizations, like ongoing credits if you're a nurse and you treat transgender people, or an endocrinologist, or whatever. At this convention, and I went 3 years in a row, 3 days, all day, and every hour they have like 5 topics, and you just wing it. You say, okay, let me look at this big catalog, and you can look in advance, or you can just do it on the fly when you arrive. And you say, okay, which of these topics is the most important to me at this time to learn about? Well, I was going from seminar to seminar. I don't remember, it was the first day, the first year, or the second, but I noticed a lot of people were in the same seminars as me. So clearly they were about the same stage as my daughter. They were needing the same information. So I just by chance sat down to one woman. She was young enough to be my daughter. She was just about hitting 40. Actually had 2 kids, was married, and was transitioning to be female. And she ended up being my mentor. Just a great person to bounce ideas off of, get information. She was always like 4 or 5 months ahead of my daughter, so that was really helpful. And my daughter used some of the same providers that she did. Another woman stopped me outside, and she was my age, in my mid-60s, and she was in her mid-60s, and she was transitioning. And you will be surprised how many people at that convention are transitioning much later in life. Maybe their circumstances, maybe their budget, maybe they were getting no support, maybe they were just afraid to say what was going on and had finally decided, I'm doing this, I can't stand living the life of this gender I was born into. So I stayed in touch with these 2 women, and given that I met them as women, they were just months ahead of my daughter, but I think of them as women. And I'm still in touch with one. One has since moved off to Canada. They were both professional. One was, the young one was a very high-level executive. I don't know if she slept at night, taking care of the 2 kids, then going through a divorce, going through surgeries, going through everything, and being a high-level executive at the same time. And she did come out to her major company while she was there. She's now with a firm in Manhattan and works remotely and flies all over the country. So this is referred to as the PTWC, the Philadelphia Transgender Wellness Conference. I went 3 years because I kept on learning and kept on learning. And it is free, but they do want donations if you can possibly afford it. And it's sponsored by many companies, not just major hospitals, not just doctors' offices. It's all these LGBTQ, but mostly T, transgender organizations from around the country have tables. People of all kinds do the presentations. It's like jury presentations. You have to go through quite a bit to prove to the committee there that you have something to say that might be unique from some of the other speakers. And it's a major help to your chances of getting to do that if you are transgender. And it doesn't hurt if you're a person of color, because so much of the people of color community are the ones that really got this thing rolling at the Mazzoni Center. The Mazzoni Center is like the capital of all things LGBTQ, and they are the main sponsors, and they organize this whole thing every year. Usually in the first quarter of the year, they put out the dates for the next convention. It's usually been in the summer, and I hope to apply next year to be a speaker, because I was finding, I went to seminars on this, and this, and this, and this, but not a seminar that put the pieces together in a way that you could sort of chart a path. And that's really the objective of this lecture, to show people that there are all these major steps, and this is the order that my daughter and I, we just made it up as we went along, that we went through. It seemed logical to us, and it seemed to have worked out well. And if 4 years seems like a long time to go through this, that's at lightning speed to get all of this done. I mean, we were going full speed ahead, because she wanted to get her life rolling. She had gotten her bachelor's degree, now she was getting an associate of science to tack onto that so that she'd have professional skills beyond making $15 an hour, which is what she was getting in the bachelor's degree. And she just wanted to launch herself as a young woman. Okay. Mazzoni Center is down in Philadelphia, easy to find. We were not able to take advantage of going there because for her, coming out from the distant suburbs, we live as far out as here, she would have had to take 2 different forms of transportation to get in there, lose a whole day, not to mention the fact that she was up all night working at the hospital, trying to fit her classes in, lab work on the weekends for her classes. I mean, there's just no way she could go there. So I started the search for an endocrinologist who would prescribe hormones. The first decision to be made if you're going to start hormones is whether or not you plan to have children. In my daughter's case, she had never wanted children. No way, never. So that was an easy decision for her not to save any sperm before she started this. When you see an endocrinologist, they will give you something called informed consent. They'll give you very understandable, a few pages of information about which hormone treatments are reversible, which ones are not reversible, how long might it be reversible, so that you really know what you're signing up for and you are dead sure that this is what you want to do. Finding an endocrinologist was very difficult. I called around, same insurance plan from employer, this endocrinologist office, this one and that one. And they said, well, we have all these endocrinologists that work here, but they're not trained to do this, and they're not interested in learning either, which was a little disheartening. And then I found out through word of mouth, somebody had moved in from Chicago, just started with an endocrinology practice, not too far from here, as a matter of fact, and she was an expert on the subject. It wasn't written down in her insurance list of things that she did, and she did a great job. As it turned out for my daughter, she was on hormones 15 months prior to surgery, which is perhaps the minimum you'd want to be on before surgery. Among other things, they want to get you stable on the hormones that are gradually moving you into the new gender. They want to lower the hormones of the other gender so that when you have surgery, your body doesn't go into shock. They want to monitor all that, and they do blood testing every month, and they talk to you enough that they feel convinced that you are not suicidal, because they certainly don't want to be responsible for pushing you over the edge. I mean, there's even things like they just want to see, in my case of my daughter, how much breast growth there would be naturally before she had surgery. It is really good to have somebody checking this out, because it just happens there's about 4 different methods for starting estradiol, which is a hormone for women, And the first method my daughter used, that she tried, just blew her numbers out and up and down, which is no good. The second method that she tried has been perfect, and she's on it to this day. There was a third method that my mentor, the young woman, was on, which was injecting herself once a week. And that was not going to work for my daughter, because up until then, my daughter had a severe needle phobia going into this. In order to get her to a blood test, I had to drug her with anti-anxiety drugs from her primary care physician and lead her around like, a sheepdog. Unfortunately, she was able somehow to will herself to be able to do this without the drugs, because there were a lot more appointments and a lot more needles to go through. So, just one complication. Another big thing is surgeons want you to be living in your new gender for a full 12 months at a minimum before you go to surgery. Well, that makes a lot of sense. You better have 12 months of experience in that new gender everywhere in your life, whether you go to the grocery store or to your job or wherever you go, to test this out. I mean, she wasn't transvestite, she wasn't dressing as a woman, she didn't have a thing in her apartment, not one thread of female clothing. I mean, if you look through her apartment, there was no sign this was even going to be happening. So, let me see. So then the next big thing is we had to research for a surgeon, and that was pretty easy. There were only about 12 in the United States. I think 4 or 5 of them came to this convention every year to speak, to explain to people in graphic detail what these surgeries were and what your choices were and how successful they were and what different approaches a few of the different surgeons had. So among the 12, doing the research, and this is probably the most critical research you do, because you don't want a surgeon who isn't doing a good job, especially with something as drastic as this. There were a couple that I eliminated from the list because they seemed to not have great reviews. They had good reviews, but not great reviews. And for aftercare, they sort of once they did the surgery, they just sort of pushed you aside and went on to the next patient, which is not what you want, because there's plenty of follow-up that's needed. There was one that didn't take insurance. There was one that would only do surgeries below the waist. What surgeries was my daughter seeking? From the bottom up to the top, either a vulvoplasty or a vaginoplasty, and I'd be glad to go into the difference in the Q&A if you are interested. She needed a labiaplasty. I can explain that later also. She wanted a tracheal shave so her Adam's apple wouldn't be bobbing up and down, which would be a little distracting if you're a female. Although the 60-something-year-old woman that I met just wore scarves every day, but I didn't think my daughter wanted to do that for the rest of her life. There is breast augmentation, sort of an obvious one. Which is pretty different than for women, because the man's chest is different, and you need somebody that's worked with a male chest to augment the breasts. Plus you have to decide what size you want. So she went to sort of medium, nothing too big. What else? Okay. So then there's about 6 surgeries you can get to make your face more female. These are cosmetic surgeries, insurance doesn't cover it. Just looking at my daughter over and over, trying to imagine her as a female, I came up with 2 of the 6 that I thought would be the best bang for the buck and that probably were sensible to do. And when we met the surgeon that we found, who was out in Arizona, I thought it was worth traveling to Arizona to get the best hair possible for my daughter. We had to beg her to say what she thought my daughter should do, because she didn't want to say to my daughter, well, you need this and this and this to make her patient feel self-conscious. But she agreed with me that reducing the size of her nose a little bit, because it was a little bit sized as a male nose, maybe a big male nose, and sculpting her forehead to be a little more feminine is surprisingly effective in changing how you look. I don't know if there's a reverse one for men, but maybe there is. A lot of what I'm talking about tonight is applicable to people going the other direction, from female to male. A lot of the different steps, maybe not exact equivalents, but it shows probably it's sort of the same path. This doctor happened to be, this surgeon out in Arizona, happened to be transgender. She had trained, well, she was a very experienced surgeon, cosmetic surgery and hand surgery of all things, prior to having surgery to become a woman with this world-renowned surgeon out in Arizona. And she trained under him and to this day works in his practice, the two of them. So I thought she had great reviews, and one of the big things is she could take my daughter, do surgery in 12 months, do the follow-up surgery within 6 months, and still have 2 months left on the insurance policy that we had for my daughter, which was a COBRA policy. A COBRA policy, if you don't know, is the kind that if you're working for an employer and you discontinue employment, by law, they have to offer you the same insurance to you for another 18 months, as long as you pay a whole lot of money for it, which we did. And so when she started COBRA, and it was not really planned that she would start on a certain date, suddenly you had this deadline. She needs to have the surgeon lined up, she has to have everything lined up, because it's felt important to me to know exactly what quality of insurance she was going to have. And I asked my daughter, "Are you ready to go?" And she's like, "Yeah, I am." So, because we were thinking maybe she'd wait another 6 months, but when this happened, we're like, okay, we're ready to go, we've got the surgeon lined up. So that was, whatever it was, August, I think. Yeah, August in 2018. Well, for 2 years, very privately, my daughter and I, her medical providers, and my husband were the only people that knew what was going on. She was still dressing as male, using her old name, which is referred to as a dead name once you've transitioned and legally changed your name, and nobody knew. So on Monday, my daughter and I went madly shopping to Kohl's and the Loft and all these places because she needed female clothing. And we bought some skirts because something I hadn't thought about, she couldn't wear tight female pants, not with her male genitalia, at least at that point. And we bought a few tops. We went into a shoe store. She presented as male. She's sitting beside her mom. The salesman we're bringing out these female shoes. I think the salesman's going, "This is interesting." But she picked her first pair of female shoes, and I explained to her that women often have more than one pair of shoes. And they own more than like 2 outfits because you don't want to be doing laundry every day. I mean, she just hadn't thought through the female life that thoroughly. She just knew she wanted to be a woman. We also went to a mastectomy specialist bra shop to fit her for false boobs. So that was nice. They were great. What else did we get? Oh, I took her to a salon just to trim her hair so it just looked neater. I had somebody professionally do her makeup just to show her what makeup would do for her face. And we went on a vacation, so that was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like Thursday, Fridays, whatever. We went for a very short number of days up to Boston to visit her brother and his girlfriend. It was a rare family get-together in our very small family because we had no grandchildren at this point. A lot of relatives living in this area where we live, but not my immediate nuclear family. So we went up there and we acted like everything was normal because we thought the vacation would be more fun if it wasn't all just focused on this dramatic news. My daughter had asked me to be her spokesperson for coming out. And so we got home on a Friday night, I guess. Saturday, I called my son, and I said, I have some happy news. I guess I just left a message. Let me know when you're home in your apartment. And he called back, and I said, you know what LGBT stands for? He said, yeah, I live in Boston, and there's rainbow flags and rainbow intersections everywhere. I'm very familiar with that. And I said, well, today, you have a sister, not a brother. Her name is Caroline, and she's transgender. And oh, by the way, I found out in the first hour of her telling me 2 years ago, she's also a lesbian. So that sort of explains why she was always interested in girls, which sort of threw us off and made it seem like she was just a normal guy. So that was a surprise. He was as surprised as I was. I mean, you wonder, how could you not know? I was so surprised. But neither of us were shocked. So that was great. His girlfriend was right there. And he's like, you can marry said girlfriend 6 months from now. Exciting. And she asked like one question, and I went back to my daughter to say, well, how would you answer this question? And passed it around. So that was great. I thought her brother needed to be the first to know. Just by chance, just by luck, there was a family barbecue of my very large family, my sister's family that lives nearby, and a couple of people, aunt and uncle, had come from out of town for this barbecue all over North Carolina. And during the party, I told them, don't go anywhere after the party, stay here, I have some happy news. I didn't want anybody to think that somebody had died. And so, as planned, my husband, my Caroline's father, left the party. Caroline left the party. All of the next 2 generations left the party. And I sat down with the 4 aunts and uncles that my daughter was close to and explained the whole thing. Here it is. They were very supportive, very curious, asked a lot of questions, and believe me, I'm amazed that I kept it secret for 2 years because I am very close to my sisters. But I just thought this was the right way to do it. Wait until she came out and come out all at once. Now, not everybody does that. Sometimes if they're coming out, whether they're gay or non-binary or whatever, they might to this group at this time, and this group at this time, and this group at another time. But it just seemed sensible for her to do it all at once. With the exception of the Associate of Science degree program, which was mostly remote, even though it was pre-COVID, with labs on weekends. And I wrote them a letter and said that she'd be legally that new gender and the new name in December, and as of second semester, she'd be a female student at their college. So that was the only group that didn't know. So every time we went into a doctor's office at that 12-month mark, I would say, document Mr. or Mrs. Doctor that she's presenting as female. Let's get this on the record everywhere she goes so that the surgeon will be convinced. In fact, she's presenting as female. My daughter had lived with us for a year and a half after her bachelor's degree on the West Coast. And a lot of my neighbors that we are very close to, and by the way, I hope all of you are my neighbors when my husband and I move here. We're on the list. She was known as a male. She lived nearby in an apartment. I knew she'd come over as a female, and I wanted to tell all my good friends. So I wrote an email to them and a few distant relatives on my side of the family, and I'm just going to read it to you. It says, from Susanna and James Blake. By the way, that's not my real name. That's not my husband's name, but I thought I'd leave my daughter's name out of this for her privacy. Dear family and friends, little did James and I know 25 years ago that our son, blank, blank, Blake, would one day become our daughter, Caroline Anastasia Blake. While her legal name and gender change will occur several months from now, today she is Caroline. She started feeling that she should have been born a girl about 10 years ago. She disclosed her gender dysphoria to us over 2 years ago. Transitioning to be a lesbian, transgender woman is a remarkably complex and time-consuming process spanning several years. Feel free to ask me, Susanna, detailed questions about her journey or ask Caroline directly. While she adjusts to being out, she will be pursuing her pre-professional college coursework full-time with the goal of obtaining nationally recognized credentials. With all my heart, Caroline's mom, Susanna. See, even today, it just about brings me to tears. So, one other major thing that she had done before coming out was started having removal of unwanted hair. If you were male, you're transitioned to female, there was sure to be body hair, even if you come from a line of men with almost no body hair or limited body hair, as in her case. There's hair in a whole lot of places you don't want it, and especially you don't want it up here or on your neck or on your chin. But so she went through 38 separate painful appointments of laser hair removal over various areas of her body. And I said, forget the legs. You know, I have to shave my legs because I want them smooth. So you're just going to have to put up with that being a female. But she did areas that I don't have to worry about, like her chest and you know, her arms are a little bit hairy, whatever. So even with topical creams and Motrin and whatever, it's painful. Towards the end, also she saw electrolysis person, which takes out every single little hair follicle, which is the only permanent way to get rid of hair. And she went 4 times, and then she relocated. So she's really going to need to go back to that if she doesn't want to be shaving for the rest of her life. So that's a big deal that you wouldn't necessarily think about. Let me see what I've got here. Okay, I think I covered that. Moving right along. Okay, so how do you change your name? How do you change your gender? Well, we live in Chester County, not Delaware County where you are, and we had to file with the Court of Common Pleas. Being very good at paperwork and having quite a bit of self-confidence, no legal training though, I decided to do it myself for my daughter, because you can pay like $2,000 or more for an attorney to do this for you, or you can do it yourself for about $500. It takes about 3 months whether you have an attorney or no attorney. And the way Chester County, a lot of counties do it, is you go in and you file a bunch of paperwork, you pay little fees to all these different offices, you get the fingerprints, you get the ad in the newspapers, a lot of different things that you have to do both that day when you go in and after that in order to get your court date sent 90 days later. Now this was made way easier for me because my mentor, a 40-year-old, lived in the same county, out in Chester County. She sat down and wrote a list, line by line, 7 pages of how to go about changing your name. I mean, and she had how to get your passport changed, how to get your social security card changed, you know, how to get your driver's license changed. She didn't have how to get your birth certificate changed because that's different for everybody depending on where you were born. It turned out that it was a little more difficult than planned. I wrote to the state of Oklahoma, where my daughter lived all of 4 weeks, but she was born there. And they actually had a procedure for doing it. The only little snag was you have to get the gender changed by court order. And in Pennsylvania, they do court orders for name changes, but not for gender changes. So I went into the court, tried to find some paperwork that applied to the situation, wrote up a little form, got it through so that it ended up on the judge's desk the day that she was to appear before the court, and said, you know, this is necessary for her state of birth. And he questioned my daughter when she stood up at a podium in the courtroom in front of the gates where the audience sits. And I was sitting there with my husband. And he's like, well, we don't do that. And I'm going, you know, in the back, like, please talk to me. And I'm like, okay, lady, what's your deal? And I said, well, I'm power of attorney for my daughter. And he's like, but that's not an attorney. I said, I know, but I really need to talk to you. So he said, okay. And we did, you know, I learned this all on Law and Order and some of those other legal shows. You know, we needed to go up to the bench and have an aside with him. And I explained the situation, and he says, well, I'll take it into account and, you know, think about this. Well, he did. He did go through with it. The next day we found out that he'd approved her gender change. And when the court order came out, it said everything correctly, and it added the fact that she went from male to female. And in fact, today, her Oklahoma birth certificate, which I thought, hey, if you're going to change your name, you might as well change it on everything. Like you show it when you get married, and maybe someday she'll get married. And it would be nice to have her birth certificate there like everybody else does. And at the bottom in fine print, it says, on this day, this court, this judge, the Court of Common Pleas of Chester County, Pennsylvania, gave this person this name, blah, 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 to this name, blah, 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 from male to female. So it's actually on there. And today, that state is so conservative, I imagine people have recently passed laws to make that so you can't do it anymore once they discovered that you could change your birth certificate. And there are many people that object to that. Okay, so then I had my court order. I had already updated the power of attorney with an attorney so I could do all my daughter's health stuff and everything now in her new name and not just her old name. I notified colleges, financial institutions, credit cards, insurance, utilities, even the Selective Service. Though they did call me one time and I said, I don't think she's a candidate anymore. And so that to this day, things do pop up where I have to prove that she is a she and she has this name. I mean, it follows you for a while. Even recently, the Department of Labor and Industry of Pennsylvania had her name and Social Security with the male gender and name, and we had to clear that up before she could move on to something. Choosing a name. That's the fun part. I got to choose my kids' names with my husband when she was born, and actually Caroline was the name that I had picked out if our child was going to be a girl, or either of our children. They both turned out to be male. But I thought it went well with her last name, and so I went home and I thought, well, this is fun, names again. You know, all these years later, 25 years later. So I wrote this list of 25 names that I thought went with our last name. I came into my daughter's apartment and I said, now, first of all, do you want to change your last name? And she said, for her privacy, she said, this day and age, all they have to do is a few strokes on a keyboard and they're going to figure out that I was male and what my old name was. You know, you just can't hide today. So she said, so I'll keep the last name, which I think my husband was quite pleased. And then I gave her the 25 names, and she didn't like any of my names. Okay. She picked a name that was excellent. It was simple, female, not too many letters in it, because one of her disabilities is handwriting. She's more than bad handwriting, believe me. And then I said, well, I mean, before you go to file the court papers, this was back a few months, you need to have the name chosen, and have you thought of a middle name? No. I said, okay, I'm gonna go home tonight, I'll pick middle names that go between the first name you picked and the last name. And I came back with 10 names, and lo and behold, she picked 2 that she liked equally, which I was very pleased to participate in the process. And she said, you just pick, which I did. So I referred to her as Caroline Anastasia Blake. Anastasia was the alternate name, and I thought, oh, that's a lot of letters, and with her handwriting it'd be hard to do, not to mention just a lot of syllables. Plus, I don't know if Anastasia is from Russia, but we have no Russian heritage that I know of. Okay, let me see how I'm doing on time here. Okay, we are doing well. Because we're going to do more lecture, and then we'll go on to Q&A, and I'm hoping some of you have questions when the time comes. So, trans advocacy. A big part of dealing with transgender transition is advocating for yourself or having somebody else that's going to advocate for you. I had to really press her employer to reveal what surgeries were covered by her insurance policy. They gave out that little slick brochure, a tiny little pamphlet about their insurance, but they wouldn't give her the policy, the contract that the employer had with the insurance company. So I called around. I finally had to go to the in-house counsel for a fairly major Philadelphia company and said, you have to tell us. She's paying premiums. So a month later, we went in, my daughter and I, while she was still employed at that time, and they told us, well, we've researched and we found two things that are covered. And I said, what about breast augmentation? Is that covered? They went, oh, I don't know, So they were not prepared for this meeting, and in-house counsel was there with the head of benefits. So because it's fairly new, I guess, they don't get that many requests for this surgery. They just didn't know everything. So the next day they found that out. So I thought, well, this is great. 3 of her surgeries are covered. Well, I happened to walk into that hospital, pick up a prescription for my daughter. She no longer worked there, but her prescriptions were still at that pharmacy. And I saw all these signs for an insurance company. This is late in the year. And I'm going, wait a minute, are they switching insurance companies? Not telling the people on the COBRA 18-month extension, which was the case. And indeed, they had a new company. So I had to reapply for all the transgender surgeries. I was thrilled to find out that they also included tracheal shades for transgender patients. So this was really looking good. In January, I got a contract from that company at our home address. It was pages of legalese, and they were going to cover her 4 surgeries at the top tier of reimbursement. I mean, I was just, yes, this is great, less out-of-pocket expenses. So, 2 days, this is August, 8 months later, 2 days before my daughter and I were going to fly to Arizona for the first 5 surgeries the following week, I got a letter from the insurance company saying, basically, we've changed our minds. We're going to reimburse her at the 3rd tier, way much less reimbursement. And I said, but no, you can't do that. And the woman on the phone said, well, you can appeal in a month from now, as she was trained to say. And I said, no, we're going to deal with this today. So I said, get somebody on the phone that I can talk to. And she said, okay, I'll have so-and-so call you back. I ran to get the contract, saw the 8 reasons they could deny this coverage. None of them applied to my daughter's case. And I'm like, okay. So get on the phone, and I said, I think NPR or the New York Times would be very interested in this story. And guess what? They approved it. They stuck with their contract. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Her mom. So I can go into quite a bit more detail about the surgeries, but we spent a month in an Airbnb that I picked out, townhouse in Arizona, near to the surgeon's office, the surgery center, a local hospital. Fortunately, my daughter, Caroline, had just finished not only graduating with the AS degree, she also had done her national certification and passed on the first try, thank goodness. And I was long retired, and so I could spend a month there, and I just wanted to be in the same town as the surgeon. A lot of people fly in from all over the country, and spend a couple of weeks and then go home and then communicate with the doctor that way. But I just wanted to be there. She was having 3 surgeries on a Tuesday, 2 more on a Friday. This is major. The surgeon thought it was a great thing to do because then you go through this whole thing, this everything at once, and then you recover, maybe a longer recovery, but you get it over with. So if you can afford the time, if you have the money to do it then and do it all. So that we did have a couple of setbacks. And one of them I heard after the fact was she needed some more blood for the second set of surgeries, so she had a transfusion, not a lot of blood. And that was a surprise to the doctor, and she was a little bit of a mystery. So of course, when I got home to Pennsylvania, I ran and donated some more blood. I had done it in the past because I thought, well, she needed blood, everybody else needs blood, and I wanted to do my part. The other thing that normally happens to people our age. It's called post-operative delirium, and if you're sort of frail, like me, you can't handle all the anesthesia and all the drugs as well as younger people. So she finished her surgeries on Friday. My husband flew out on Monday morning. By Monday night, she was having some odd sensations, like hearing some sounds coming through the vent that weren't really coming there. And by the next evening, she would close her eyes and see things that weren't there. She was becoming delirious. So for better or worse, I don't know if I made the right decision. I didn't feel like she was in danger. She basically stayed awake all night. I didn't get much sleep. The next morning, we were already going to see the surgeon for a physical follow-up. We went early in the morning to the doctor. The doctor checked her out physically and said, beeline to the ER. So we get an Uber and tell the Uber driver, please take us to the ER, which I expect doesn't happen that often. And they were able to treat her immediately with IV drugs that just took her down off of this delirium, put her to sleep for a few hours, which she desperately needed. And the doctor, they did a brain scan just to make sure she didn't have something unrelated to all the surgeries. And we agreed that she would spend the night. And that was that. I mean, the next morning she was good to go. I mean, she just had all the surgeries, but I could get her back home, and home was being the Airbnb. And I asked somebody from the doctor's office to help her up the stairs, because if you had all this surgery down there, it's not easy walking upstairs. In December, she was scheduled, so that was August. In December, she was, and through September when we flew home. In December, she was going to have follow-up surgery, some cosmetic work on her nether regions. And also, I felt that she needed a little bit of a fix on her nose, because this bottom part was sort of dripping down. And the surgeon said, absolutely, I'll do that for free. I agree. It wasn't quite right. Well, in the meantime, she's just recovering. I'm sure she was going through more hair removal appointments. That seemed to go on forever. She's taking all the drugs. I mean, the drugs she had in Arizona were beyond belief. Maybe all of you have had multiple surgeries, but we had like piles of drug bottles on the table, Sunday through Saturday, morning, noon, and night drugs that she needed. Different days of the week, like I'd start a certain one and go for 5 days, and then she'd be done with that drug. She had to keep track of the days. I was crazy, but I'm pretty organized. So we did that, and then she had voice lessons to help her raise her voice up a little higher, because the women's estradiol does not raise your voice. It just doesn't help. If you're going the other direction from female to male and you take testosterone, it does lower your voice. But she didn't study very hard, and I'm not surprised. She didn't make a priority. So to this day, she has sort of an in-between voice. If she gets on the phone, she tries to make it a little more female sounding. She'll make a little effort. Otherwise, it's sort of somewhere in between. And she's not the only transgender person that said, I'm stopping there, I'm not gonna work my voice. Just a little bit more on the surgeries. I had a 25-page document for every surgery she had. So like in August, I had 125 pages. Now, there was a lot of overlap because they were applicable to any surgery that this surgeon was gonna do. But between that and texting photos with my little camera, including some intimate, well, all intimate photos, I could ask questions like, is this normal? And send it off to the doctor's office so that we didn't have to come in for every little thing. And in every case they said, yeah, that's normal. Because even with 25 pages, they can't explain everything that's gonna happen over time, what things are gonna look like the first week, the second week, and whatever. And there were a lot of physical things that she needed to do following her surgery, just like somebody might have rehab for months. It was sort of rehab for all the parts that have been changed. So let me see. I'm going to get close to the end here. What did this cost? $58,000. What would it have cost without that insurance? Probably a couple $100,000. If you have any relatives that you know could use some funding, are going through this that you care about, believe me, they could use some financial help. Okay, so moving forward to today, do I have like the 3-minute warning going now? Okay, 1 minute, okay. 1 minute, talk really fast. Oh, 3 minutes, good. I won't have to talk as fast. I found she got her first professional job about an hour from here. I found a doctor there very easily that could monitor her hormones annually and prescribe them. I found a primary care physician that could see her a little more often than the average young patient because so much is going on with her. You wouldn't want to go every 5 years like a lot of 20-year-olds would do. I wrote to the local hospital system where she'd been an employee and had some of her treatments like her mammogram and told them 8 ways in which they could have done a much better job of treating a transgender patient. And the fact is today, I bet they've met all of those criteria. But at the time, they didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want me on any committees. They didn't want to hear about it, which displeased me. So I just wrote it all down and sent it to them because they were applying for something called the Human Rights Campaign Equity Index rating. In other words, they wanted to be rated well for treating transgender people. Well, they were using the right pronouns and treating people with dignity, but that's about all they were doing, and that is not much considering everything else. So, I'm very proud to have a transgender lesbian daughter. I love her to death. She has been helped by so many people that, whether they were paid or not paid, and also, I've written an essay, so if any of you have close connections with an online publisher or a book that's doing anthology, I'd love to hear about it, because getting yourself published when you have no credentials and no agent is not easy. There's one last thing. I don't think she would mind. This is a picture of my daughter. She looks like a girl. I think she looks like a girl. And guess what? She looks like a girl in a bathing suit too. Okay, Q&A. I hope a few of you are curious. Oh, I've got one already. Now, we're going to have Kayla take a microphone around. So
I talk now.
Okay. It's up to Kayla. Kayla's in charge now. Oh, also, I've heard
Is it
close to your mouth.
Okay. You started out with her, his, all those words. That is something I'm very interested in because I'm seeing it now and I don't know what it means.
First of all, for a full accounting of that, You can find single pages or whole pamphlets by Googling online. Just go gender pronouns, and believe me, you're going to find it. The most common, of course, are for male, he, his, him, and some people will put it at the bottom of their email now, whether it's corporate or personal. For women, she, her, hers. The most common for people that feel like they're somewhere in between, non-binary, queer, somewhere in the middle, they, which is very hard for most of us to do because we think normally they is a group and not a single person. I don't happen to personally know any non-binary people, so I haven't practiced it. And I think it's gotten a lot more press in the last 2 years, and I feel like I am still learning more. But at one of the conventions, there was a person with a full male beard and a tutu skirt. I mean, at the convention, people do tend to dress a little bit almost in costume because it's fun and they know they'll be accepted. I don't know that this person, they, would have gone around in a tutu skirt all the time, but who knows. But there's all sorts of other choices, which really complicates the situation for those of us who are trying to be respectful, like Z, Zer, and there's a whole long list, and I couldn't tell you all of them. I think the best thing to do would be to look it up online. Okay. Yes? Kayla, up to the rescue.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story with us. My question is this. I now know 4 families that have transgender children in them. 10 years ago, the same families had none. Do you have any thoughts on the matter?
I do. I'm going to give you a few scattered thoughts. One is, I mentioned that my daughter felt something was wrong with her body as she entered puberty. More people that are transgender, it happens when they're like 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, when they want to wear the dress and do the activities of the other gender. It's very common. I think the fact that it is known, it has received a lot of press with celebrities and all the political stuff, that it's getting into the culture to start to recognize that this is a much more common phenomenon than we ever thought. I don't think it's people are faking it. I can understand why they would hesitate to do physical changes which can't be undone before 18. Like I said, I don't really want to get into that. First of all, I'm not an expert. I do read quite a bit about it, but I can understand why people would be very fearful. And if you just start dressing in different clothes and go to school, and if the school allows it, use a different name, like pretend it's like a nickname, but it's really the other gender, I don't think that's very harmful. What's really difficult is when the kid feels that way, suppose they're 12 or 13 or 14 or 15, and the parents are dead set against it, then you really end up with a conflict. And in fact, many families never, ever, ever accept their child as changing genders, refuse to use their new name, make them an outcast in the family, etc. So with those families, I mean, I don't know what ages they came out or you heard about it, but if you heard about it, I'm likely to lean towards saying that they are in fact transgender or possibly non-binary, somewhere in the middle, and it's not just a phase. But I lean towards believing the people. Well, if that answers your question, that's about the best I can do.